The guardians of the grove, the nurturers of nature, the wardens of the wild. There's certainly no question about where the loyalties of a druid lie. If you are the type of player who wants to turn the very forces of nature against your foes, or if you just want to turn into a cat, then the druid class is right for you. Welcome back, travelers. I'm glad to see you made it. I'm Colo, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Druid class in Baldur's Gate 3. We will go over all of the skills and abilities that every Druid's going to get as you level from 1st level to 12th level, and then after that we'll take an in-depth look into each of the Druid subclasses, that way you know what each one of those has to offer for you. Before we get started, I want to shout out the curators of the Baldur's Gate 3 wiki at bg3.wiki. They do a really good job of gathering and organizing their data on this wiki, and I used it for a lot of the information and images in this video, so be sure to check them out. And now that that's out of the way, let's talk about what the heck a druid even is. Druids are nature-based spellcasters that can pretty much fill any role in a party, just depending on how you decide to build your druid. Before we get started discussing anything else, I want to go over the Druid's class mechanic, which is Wild Shape. First up, what the heck is Wild Shape? This is your shape-shifting abilities. You're going to have the little Wild Shape icon. You'll click on this and it'll open up a menu where you can choose what shape you want to turn into. Each one of them has benefits and drawbacks, and we're going to go over each one of these forms in depth. That way you know what each one of them does, because the tooltips don't really do a great job of explaining everything that they have to offer. So we're going to take a look at them. You're going to be given 2 Wild Shape charges. This is what you have to use to shapeshift into these forms. Most of the forms cost 1 Wild Shape charge, but later on there's a few notable exceptions to that. We'll go over those when we get to them. It is worth mentioning that each Wild Shape form has its own unique health and built-in physical stats. And when I say physical stats, I mean strength, dexterity, and constitution. So your Druid's actual strength, dexterity, and constitution don't matter at all while you're shapeshifted into these Wild Shape forms. What form you've shapeshifted into is what's going to determine what those 3 stats are. However, your intelligence, charisma, and wisdom do transfer over to when you're shapeshifted. So basically all the mental stuff you keep. The physical stuff changes, which makes sense because you're turning into a damn tiger or a bear or whatever. So your physical stats are going to change. You still have your Druid's brain inside that head, though. That's important to remember. And while all Druids are going to gain access to various Wild Shape forms, not all Druids are necessarily specialized in shapeshifting. Each of the 3 subclasses is actually going to feel extremely different from the other 2 in both utility and lore and how it actually feels to play. The options you're going to have are the spellcasting focused Circle of the Land Druids, the wild shaping experts of the Circle of the Moon, and the rot and decay loving Circle of the Spores Druids. Like I said before, once we go over what every Druid gets, we're going to go in depth into each one of these subclasses. I just wanted to let you know the idea behind each one of the subclasses for now, but we'll cover them all later. So now that we all know what a Druid is, why don't we go and create one, shall we? See you there. On first choosing the class, you will be immediately granted several proficiencies. These are clubs, daggers, javelins, maces, quarterstaffs, scimitars, sickles, spears, light armor, medium armor, and shields. This is actually a really good starting set of gear proficiencies. You're going to start off with the ability to be pretty tanky right off the bat, and a bunch of weapons are opened up for you to use. And then depending on what race you choose, you can supplement some of the proficiencies with race proficiencies and stuff like that too. Take a look at what each race has to offer you, and you can pick based on that, or you're fully capable of just building whatever you want and you're going to be perfectly fine. It's not going to keep you from beating this game, I promise. The Druid's 3 main stats are Wisdom, Dexterity, and Constitution. Wisdom is your spellcasting stat. This is going to increase the damage and effectiveness of spells that you're casting as a druid. Dexterity is going to determine your initiative rolls in combat, your armor class, and your damage with various types of finesse weapons. And Constitution is going to determine how much health your character has, as well as how hard they are to interrupt when they're concentrating on spells, which is going to be very important. You will most likely want different amounts of these stats depending very heavily on what subclass you're planning on rolling your druid as. So if you're going to be one of the more spellcasting focused subclasses, you might lean more heavily into Constitution and Wisdom, whereas if you're going for a shapeshifting druid, it actually might be in your best interest to just not put any points into your physical stats, since you're going to spend most of the time in wild shape form, and you can just bump your other stats pretty high, but we'll go over that a little bit more later on. You will also get to choose 2 cantrips from your druid spell list, which has some pretty solid options. Produce Flame is very useful. When you use it, your hand basically sets on fire, and it'll just stay on fire, generating a little bit of light around your character while it's on fire like that. While your hand is on fire, you can throw the fire at somebody as an attack, but you don't have to. You can just carry it around all day as a light source. And of course, you get access to the single best spell in the entirety of Baldur's Gate 3, Guidance. And if you don't think Guidance is the best spell in the game, you've probably never used it. You need to take this cantrip. It's the best one on the list. There's no question about that. At least one person in your party needs to have Guidance. Any of you who think I'm exaggerating, go ahead and pick this. Come back to this video after a few play sessions, rewatch the whole video again so that I get more ad revenue, and then tell me in the comments about how many times you've used Guidance, and the answer is like 5,000, so just trust me, it's good. For anybody who doesn't know what Guidance does, it's a cantrip that you can cast on your party members, and it's usable even while they're right in the middle of a conversation. It adds a plus 1d4 bonus to all ability checks for 10 turns, or as long as the caster maintains concentration. So basically, if you have someone in your party that has this cantrip and you guys are all traveling together and someone gets in a conversation that has a dialogue check that they have to roll, this person will be able to add 1d4 to any dialogue checks that they're going to roll while they're in that conversation. There are no drawbacks whatsoever, and it's a cantrip, so it's free to use. This is absolutely going to add up to being one of the most beneficial spells you have in your entire arsenal, so definitely don't sleep on this one. On top of the 2 cantrips you're going to choose, you will be granted all of your druid's level 1 spells with the ability to prepare 2 of them right away for use. Since the druid is a prepared spellcaster, anytime you unlock a level of spells, so your level 2 spells, your level 3 spells, you get all of them. Your druid learns all of them at the same time. You can't prepare and unprepare spells in combat, but in between combat encounters, you can just swap these spells in and out on your prepared list however you see fit. So if you need to give somebody Long Strider in your party and you don't have Long Strider prepared and you're not in combat, you can go ahead and just unprepare something else and prepare Long Strider and then cast it on them, and then you can just take it back off the bar. A lot of the things that you do, you don't even have to keep the spells prepared. Somebody even mentioned in one of my comments, I believe, that if you summon a minion and then unprepare the minion summoning spell from your bar, that you can replace it with something else and you still get to keep the minion. That's probably a bug. It's probably not intended, but that's ridiculously powerful, so something to keep in mind. But all of this preparing and unpreparing in between combat leads to druids being very good for party utility. They can cover a lot of the gaps in what your party doesn't have. Your druid can just learn and unlearn things in between combat and help you out. There's a lot of really strong options here, like Long Strider, Ice Knife, Fairy Fire, ton of good choices. So now that you know what these tree huggers are all about, and we've got our druid created, let's go talk about what you're going to get as you're leveling one up. When you reach 2nd level, you will be granted a 3rd level 1 spell slot, and will have more slots to prepare your spells into. So pick what you need, and remember that this can be changed at any time as long as you're not in combat. More importantly though, 2nd level is where you gain your 2 wild shape charges that we mentioned before, and your first 4 wild shape forms. Like I said before, the tooltip descriptions of some of these forms are not great, so we're going to go over each one individually so you know exactly what they have to offer you. First up, Badger form. This one grants access to the Bite ability, which does piercing damage, the Claws ability, which does slashing damage, so that's already nice. You got 2 different damage types built in. And Claws also has a chance to push targets away from you when you hit them, which is nice. And you also have the Burrow ability. This one will allow you to go underground. You target the area that you're going to pop out of the ground from, and you will burrow underground where you're at, go underneath your enemy's feet. It will ignore opportunity attacks. This is a safe way to move from one place to another. And when you pop out of the ground, you will potentially knock nearby creatures prone, which is a really good way to set up other attacks or other party members to be able to capitalize on your enemies laying prone. Also, look at this friggin' badger. Is this what you were imagining when you read the skill name? No. This is a friggin' black and white bear, okay? If I ran into a badger that was this size in real life, it's over. I'm done. Super fast burrowing bears? No thank you. I don't think so. Secondly, cat form. This one is much weaker than the badger bear we just talked about, and more importantly, much smaller. This wild shape form isn't necessarily intended to be used in combat situations, though you can use it to sneak around or whatever, but it is still absurdly useful for other things, like traveling around in the open world. You see, the cat is small enough to fit into the small cracks and holes and walls that you find that you have to be really small to get through. Well, druids, at this super early point in the game, are one of the classes that can just breeze right through that stuff. You turn into a cat, you sneak right through the hole, you're good to go. Cats are also very light, and you can have a party member throw your druid somewhere. I've seen videos of people getting thrown up over gates and stuff like that. It might do damage to you, and it might knock you out of cat form when you get over there, but who cares if you're on the other side of the gate and you can unlock it for your party. Your cat form does have the claws attack, which will do embarrassingly low damage, and the meow ability, which is actually really good. You can use this to have your cat sneak off over in the distance and meow, and it will distract enemies. They'll go over there to investigate, and you can use that to sneak around past them on somebody else, whatever. It can open up some possibilities that aren't normally there by distracting somebody. I'm going to go ahead and give a freaking arachnophobia warning for this next one. If you don't like spiders, the next thing that we're going to talk about is a big ass spider. So if you don't want to see this, look away. I don't like spiders either, but you know what? This spider form is freaking awesome. So we're going to talk about it. First of all, you can jump super far. You can bite enemies, which deals piercing damage and possibly poisons them. And you have the web ability. When you're in combat, this will allow you to shoot a ground targeted area of webs onto the ground. Anybody walking through the webs will have to succeed a dexterity saving throw, or they will become enwebbed, which means all attacks against them will have advantage, their own attacks and dexterity saving throws will have disadvantage, and the webs count as difficult terrain to everybody that's in them, which will reduce your movement speed by half. So even if you pass that dexterity saving throw, your movement speed still gets cut in half while you're standing in this thing. Next up, we've got Hugo, the wolf. Anybody who hasn't played Bloody Roar, you're missing out. When I thought of this Hugo the Wolf reference, I had a ridiculous wave of nostalgia that hit me thinking about this game. Those games were freaking awesome. Anyway, wolf form will grant your druid various benefits as well. Bite is a standard piercing damage attack, just like normal. Exposing bite will deal. If I can learn how to talk, that'd be great. Exposing bite will deal piercing damage as well, but it will also distract the target if it lands, which will cause the next attack made from within 5 feet of that target to be a guaranteed critical hit. So that's really good. You can use that to set up another party member to deal out a ton of damage all at once. A bunch of good options are available to you. You will also get the Inciting Howl ability, which is a howl your wolf form will let out that will increase the movement speed of any allies that hear it within 30 feet. It'll give them 10 feet of additional movement speed on their next turn. This is amazing as well because it stacks with Longstrider, so your druid can already be increasing everybody's movement speed, and then this is another movement speed on top of it, and I tested it out. They stack for sure. Wolf form also has the Pack Tactics ability, which is a passive ability that grants them advantage on attacks against any targets that are within 10 feet of one of their allies. This is really good also. Just another situation where passively you're going to be dealing a ton more damage. You will also be tasked with selecting your subclass at 2nd level, but like I said before, we're going to cover all those at the end, so I'm not going to talk about it right now. So with all that said, let's go ahead and continue on to 3rd level. You will get another level 1 spell slot, 2 level 2 spell slots, and access to your Druid's level 2 spells, but that's not all. 2 of the subclasses will receive a bonus at this level, but you won't know which 2 until later on. The suspense is killing you, I know. 4th level will grant you another cantrip, another level 2 spell slot, and your Druid's first feat. As always, look through the list of feats, see if there's anything that sounds like it would be useful or interesting for you to try out for your party. If not, there is a feat called Ability Improvement that will allow you to boost your main stats, and this is always a viable option. Just make sure that you're boosting the stats that are important to your character. So Wisdom, Constitution, and Dexterity, as I said, or if you're going to be a Moon Druid and you're going to be spending most of your time in wild shape forms, you'll have to decide how you want to divvy your stats up. If you want to be on the safe side and have some Constitution and Dexterity for when you're outside of wild shape form, just in case something goes wrong, just know that it's going to be up to you to tweak. Okay, I might want a little bit extra Dexterity just in case I get knocked out of owlbear form and I'm standing there in caster form getting slapped by 4 enemies and I have 0 Constitution and 0 Dexterity. You're dead. You wouldn't be able to survive something like that. So you got to be careful and build your character the way your party needs them to be built. If you pick something and you end up not liking it, or you want to try something else out, you can go talk to Withers, pay him some gold, and he will allow you to respec your character. You know, you can actually pick a different class if you want. You can reallocate your stats, pick different feats whenever you get to those levels. No big deal. Then you can go ahead and rob Withers, get your money back from him, and there's no consequences whatsoever. Even if he catches you 1,000,000 times, he doesn't care. So respec your character, get your money back, no problem. He's basically like a walking piggy bank just waiting to be busted open. Every Druid will also receive the Deep Rothe wild shape form at 4th level as well. This form will allow you to cast the Dancing Lights cantrip, which can be used to illuminate a targeted area, as well as the Gore ability, which will do decent piercing damage to your target, but interestingly, it also does additional force damage to any targets that have lesser, medium, or greater toughness. So this makes the Deep Rothe a good way to break down brittle walls, or some doors have toughness that you can bust through, and basically this big old goat's gonna ram his head into it and bust it open for you. So it's nice to have. If you have a warlock in your party, you can also use Eldritch Blast, which deals force damage to get through a lot of these things, or you can just set a freaking explosive barrel next to that thing and set it on fire and set off a big old boom and blast a wall off the foundations. But that's the cool thing. It's up to you how you want to do that. The Deep Rothe also has the Charge ability, which combines mobility, damage, and the chance to knock your targets prone. So it's the trifecta, basically. And interestingly, it also doesn't provoke opportunity attacks, so you can actually use this to get out of a bad situation. If you want to charge away from your enemies, a lot of times you'll still hit most of them, and you'll get yourself out of danger and across the room. So what more can you ask for? It's great. This is an awesome ability to have. Moon Druids also get an additional bonus at this level, but as I said before, we're going to talk about these subclass things later. So I'm actually not going to keep saying that every time. Just know that there are more subclass bonuses, and there will be bonuses at every level until 11th and 12th. And now we've arrived at 5th level. Almost every subclass in the game gets massive upgrades at 5th level in the form of extra attack for martial classes, which allows them to attack twice per action, or in the form of level 3 spells for the casters, which has some of the most powerful spells in the game, like Fireball and Lightning Bolt and Haste are all level 3 spells. Ridiculously good spells start becoming available at these levels. Well, Druids are unique because they don't get either one of those bonuses. They get both. Both of them. The small caveat with this is that the Druid's version of extra attack only works while they're in wild shape form. So your Druid is going to get access to the level 3 Druid spells and Wild Strike. Your damaging cantrips will also have an additional damage die added to their damage rolls. So this is going to help your cantrips stay relevant throughout the game. They're going to scale up one more time later on. This is nice to have. 6th level will grant all druids another level 3 spell slot and 2 new wild shape forms. Panther form will be extremely useful for sneaking around using its prowl ability. This will make you invisible and cause your first attack while you're invisible to deal an additional 1d8 damage. Then, along with bite for normal piercing damage, the Panther also has Pounce and Jugular Strike, which work very well together. Pounce leaps at a target and causes piercing damage with a chance to knock the target prone. Then, Jugular Strike is a piercing damage attack that will deal extra damage against targets that are prone. So, you know, synergy and all that. And along with the Panther form, you also get this cute little guy, Owlbear form. This one is a friggin' monster in melee combat. You're super tanky, you're strong as hell, knocking people around the battlefield like crazy. You'll have access to Claws, which will deal slashing damage, Crushing Flight, which is a leap attack that deals bludgeoning damage and can knock your targets prone. And this move has been used in multiple meme videos for the owlbear off the top rope meme, where people put their owlbear way up high on like a stack of boxes and then drop down. And this ability deals more damage the further you travel with it. It uses what people are calling Larian gravity. So if you're way high up in the air, you can drop super far down onto somebody with this thing and just one-shot certain bosses. People one-shotted Grim with it and just totally trivialized entire fights that normally cause people a lot of problems. If you're having trouble in a fight and you're willing to cheese something like this, you might be able to just throw a damn owlbear into the mix and one-shot the boss and carry on. While this owlbear stuff is definitely hilarious and ridiculous, it is 100% viable and very effective. The owlbear also has Rupture, which is an AoE slam that you can use to send chunks of earth blasting up out of the ground, causing bludgeoning damage to nearby objects and creatures, as well as potentially knocking them backwards. Having access to a powerful AoE ability like this is always good, and this looks badass. So that's obviously worth a few extra DPS right off the bat, right? And lastly, the owlbear will grant you the Enrage ability, and this one we need to talk about. On paper, this sounds very good. It enrages you, increases your strength by 2, and possibly makes nearby creatures fearful. And note that I said creatures and not enemies. And that's because it can fear your teammates too. And I actually almost lost my honor run to this because I didn't read it properly, and my guys were all standing on top of each other, and then my owlbear used Enrage because I thought it was just like Barbarian Rage, and I didn't bother to read it because I'm a dum-dum. And I clicked it and feared 2 of my own party members and almost lost my honor run at the very, very end of Act 1. Even with that being said, even if you end up not being able to use the Enrage effect at all in combat, if you just decide not to click it, owlbear form is still amazing. It's still one of the best wild shape forms you're going to have, especially this early on in the game. It's amazing to have. Upon reaching 7th level, you will receive a level 4 spell slot and access to your level 4 druid spells. And there's a few really good options at this level too, including AoE damage spells, various forms of crowd control spells, and 2 different forms of summons, both of which can be summoned at the same time, which is really strong. At 8th level, you will receive your 2nd level 4 spell slot and your 2nd feat. Same deal as before. If there's a feat that you want to try out or that sounds like it would be good, try it out. If not, bump your character's main stats and let's move on. 9th level will grant you another level 4 spell slot, a level 5 spell slot, and access to your druid's level 5 spells. 10th level is another biggin. You will gain another level 5 spell slot, another cantrip. Your cantrips are going to scale up again for the final time at 10th level, and everybody receives the Dilophosaurus wild shape form at 10th level. You might recognize this little guy as the Spitty Boy from Jurassic Park, and you'd be right. That's totally 100% accurate to real life. These dinosaurs are capable of spitting highly corrosive acid across long distances to melt and dissolve their foes, just like in real life. Acid spitting raptors running around doing flaring that thing, spitting acid all up in your face from across the room. Totally true in real life. It was a horrifying time back then when dinosaurs were around. In Baldur's Gate 3, this corrosive acid comes in the form of the Corrosive Spit ability. This will hawk a giant acid loogie right on your enemy, which will begin dissolving their armor, reducing their armor class by 1 per turn up to a maximum reduction of -5. This effect will be instantly removed if the target gets doused with water from any source. So, if your party is based on getting people wet and using cold or lightning damage spells to capitalize on their vulnerability while they're wet, then Dilophosaurus form is probably not the best choice for you to use because you're going to be washing the acid right off these people. However, if your party is set up in such a way that you can capitalize on this Corrosive Spit ability is ridiculously strong to have access to. Giving somebody a -5 to their armor class, especially if this is like a big boss, that's a huge deal. You're going to end up doing a ton of extra damage because of this. The old Spitty Boy's Bite ability deals piercing damage as well as acid damage, and the Pounce ability will allow you to leap a decent distance and deal piercing damage to the target, as well as potentially knocking them prone, just like with the Panther. This is another good mobility and damage combo, which can chain into greater damage by your group by knocking the enemy prone. You can definitely capitalize on that with other characters. Lastly, and certainly not leastly, the improved Wild Strike ability will increase your Druid's attacks per action to 3 from this point forward while they're in wild shape form. This is a very big deal, and if you're making use of your wild shape forms in combat, you will be extremely happy to have this. You are going to be friggin' stoked. More attacks is almost always better to have access to. I literally right now can't think of a time when it's not. You don't have to do all 3 of them, but you have 3 that you can do now, so that's good. At 11th level, you will receive a level 6 spell slot. It's the only one you're going to get, and your Druid's level 6 spells. All of these are powerful, but I want to shout out Hero's Feast specifically. This is a great spell that can grant your party an absolutely ridiculous amount of bonus health, especially if you're running a party with a ton of extra summons, because all of them will benefit from this spell. Wall of Thorns is pretty nasty too. Definitely give it a shot in combat and see how you like it. You can ruin somebody's day with this friggin' spell. It's crazy. And finally, ladies and gents, we made it to 12th level, where you will receive your 3rd and final feat. As before, pick what you need here or bump your main stats, which is always a strong choice. And with that being said, we have covered every bonus and ability that every Druid is going to unlock between 1st level and 12th level. So now we're going to head back to 2nd level, where you had to choose your subclass, and we're going to talk about the first one, the Circle of the Land. Druids of this circle connect to powerful magic that flows through the earth and binds all living things together. These Druids are the true tree-hugging nature specialists. They harness their powers of nature to cast powerful damaging spells, as well as to heal and support their allies. And they also have access to various forms of party utility. You will end up with a much larger selection of spells than either of the other 2 subclasses, which for any new players that have never done anything with D&D before, or this is their first CRPG game, the amount of spells that the Circle of the Land Druid gets access to can actually be super intimidating. I know this because when I first started playing the game and I saw the list of spells that they got access to when they leveled up, I was like, what the hell is this? So don't worry about that. We're going to take some of the uncertainty out of that decision. It's not that complicated. Immediately upon choosing Circle of the Land, you will get to choose another cantrip, and you will be granted the Natural Recovery ability. At 3rd level, you'll get to witness your first WTF level up screen that we described before, where you will be offered 8 pairs of spells, and you will have to choose one of those 8 pairs of spells to learn. This seems a lot more intimidating than it is. Just know that the land location names don't matter at all. Don't pay any attention to that. Those are just giving you kind of an idea lore-wise of where they got those 2 spells from in that pair. So ignore the land names. Just look at each one of the pairs of spells and decide what your character or party needs. often you're going to end up choosing a pair just for one of the spells. You might not ever use the second spell that was given to you in that pair, but that doesn't matter. If you got a really good spell out of the other one, who cares that you never use the second one? But that's what you need to look at, is what spell on this list do I need? And then if you get lucky and you can get 2 good spells in a single pair, go for it, by all means. But don't feel sad if you choose one of these pairs just for a single one of the spells and then trash the other one. Who cares about that? You got what you needed still. A few notable spells to pay attention to here are Misty Step, Darkness, Silence, Hold Person, and Spike Growth. All of those are really good. This is not an exhaustive list. There are definitely other good ones on this list, but those are just ones that I'm comfortable pointing out to pretty much anybody because of how good they are in almost any situation. So if you get stuck with your analysis paralysis, there's too many choices for you to choose, just think about these spells: Misty Step, Darkness, Silence, Hold Person, Spike Growth. Those are great choices. And once again, as we said before, at the feat levels, if you mess up and choose something you end up not wanting, go talk to Withers. 5th level is going to be your next bonus, and once again, it is a giant list of pairs of spells. Same thing here as last time. Don't let it overwhelm you, just take it one by one and figure out what you need. Some of the notable options at this level are Sleet Storm, Haste, Lightning Bolt, and Hypnotic Pattern. Once again, it's not an exhaustive list, but those are some good ones that I'm comfortable recommending. At 6th level, Circle of the Land Druids receive Land Stride, Difficult Terrain as a passive ability. This is a permanent passive buff that makes your druid immune to difficult terrain's movement impairing effects. So essentially, you're super good at running around in the woods, so you don't get slowed by plants and roots anymore, which makes sense. 7th and 9th levels will offer you 2 more lists of land spell pairs to choose from. 7th level has a few good ones like Ice Storm, Wall of Fire, Freedom of Movement, Polymorph, Greater Invisibility. There's some really good choices here. What your party needs, once again, is going to determine which one you need to choose. 9th level will offer you Cone of Cold, Conjure Elemental, Wall of Stone, Cloud Kill, among others. There are a ton of strong choices here, especially for damaging spells. There's really good damaging spell options here. Pick what you need, and then let's take a look at the Circle of the Land's last subclass bonus at 10th level. Nature's Ward is another permanent passive buff your druid will gain because of their extreme closeness to nature. This will make the druid immune to charm and frighten effects that are being cast by a Fey or elemental enemy. So basically, enemies from nature can't charm or frighten you anymore because you understand them. The buff also passively makes your druid immune to poison and disease of any kind. So resistances and immunities in this game are very strong, and this passive ability just gives you like 4 of them right off the bat. This is a super strong thing to have. Because of the crazy amount of spells that you get access to as a Circle of the Land Druid, which, as we said before, a lot of people consider that to be a negative, but if you know what you're looking at, it's actually a really good thing because they offer you a ton of different options. You can build this character in a bunch of different ways. You can be a straight up healer, you can be a full DPS caster, you can be half shapeshifting, half casting, hybrid kind of thing. It's gonna be up to you. There's a lot of options you'll have access to. And with all that being covered, let's go ahead and circle back to 2nd level and take a look at the Druid's 2nd subclass, the Circle of the Moon. Druids sworn to the moon draw on its mercurial nature to transform into massive creatures and primal elementals. Moon Druids are the shapeshifters. If you want to play a druid because you love the idea of wild shaping into various different animals and other creatures, and you just want to spend every second of your playtime in those forms, Circle of the Moon is your choice. Because of the fact that it is primarily focused on wild shaping into these various forms, the Moon Druid gains a few other tools that the other 2 subclasses don't get to make this easier and more effective. The Lunar Mend ability will allow you to spend your druid spell slots while you're in wild shape form to perform a self-heal with those spell slots. And the self-heal will heal you more depending on what level of spell slot you're using. So this is really powerful. It only only costs a bonus action too. Bonus action in a spell slot, and bonus action heals are very powerful in this game because you can do your attacks, multiple attacks per turn in wild shape form, and then also heal yourself on top of it. That's super strong. Speaking of excellent bonus action abilities, the combat wild shape passive allows moon druids to do their wild shapes for a bonus action instead of an action like the other two subclasses. I don't think I need to explain how ridiculously powerful that can be, but I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. That can be ridiculously powerful and important, and you're going to be stoked to have this. On top of these shape-shifting buffs, you're also going to gain access to a Moon Druid exclusive wild shape form, the Bear. This will turn you into a big O polar bear and grant you the Claws and Goading Roar abilities, as well as a good chunk of strength and constitution. This is a very tanky, strong wild shape form for how ridiculously early in the game you get it. Claws is a basic slashing damage attack, nothing fancy. Goading Roar will allow you to taunt nearby enemies into attacking your bear form instead of your allies. So because you're tanky, you can force people to attack you and soak up some of that damage for your teammates. It's nice. 4th level will grant you the Dire Raven form. This one has the Beak Attack and Rend Vision abilities, both of which deal piercing damage, and the latter of which can also inflict blindness on its target for 2 turns. The damage is not bad on either ability, and being able to blind your enemies this early on in the game is very strong, so the Dire Raven is not anything to be embarrassed about in combat. It's not like super weak, but combat is not where it shines. Once again, just like cat form, Dire Raven form shines in the fact that you get it at 4th level, and this lets your druid fly. It is very, very rare that a character gets access to this easily usable of a flight mechanic this early on. Being able to wild shape into a raven form and just fly whenever you want, that's awesome. It's amazing to have that at this level. You're gonna love it. This is also going to open up a bunch of potential shortcuts around quests and stuff like that, loot that you wouldn't have necessarily been able to find otherwise. Being able to fly this early in the game is a super strong thing to have. You're going to love it. The 6th level bonus, Primal Strike, sounds kind of confusing at first, but let's take a closer look. While in beast form, your attacks count as magical for the purpose of overcoming resistance and immunity to non-magical damage. Let's take a look at the resistances section on the wiki real quick and talk about what these symbols mean. When you're examining an enemy and you have a gray arrow above a damage symbol on your screen, that means that they are resistant to non-magical forms of that damage type. In this picture, this icon represents resistance to non-magical fire damage. The blue up arrow indicates resistance to magical fire damage, and a symbol with both a gray and blue arrow would indicate resistance to both magical and non-magical forms of fire damage. During your adventures, you will meet plenty of enemies with resistance to non-magical forms of piercing, slashing, and bludgeoning damage, and the Primal Strike passive we were talking about 200 years ago will prevent your druid from becoming completely useless against those type of enemies in combat. Your claws and fangs are imbued with the magic of the wilds, enchanted by nature itself, and now they count as magical weapons. Noise. Next up, at 8th level, you will receive another wild shape form, and this one is pretty badass. The Saber-toothed Tiger is a form that combines aspects from a few of the other wild shape forms into something that's just cooler. It has Bite as a basic piercing damage attack. Enhanced Jump allows you to reposition yourself in combat easily, or just for exploration purposes, you can jump really far with this thing. And the Sabertooth has a ridiculously powerful built-in health regen effect. This will heal you for 2d8 hit points every turn while you're in this form. You will also still have access to your normal Lunar Mend healing ability like all the rest of your wild shape forms, so this adds up to a ton of additional survivability. You keep throwing yourself heals and you have that built-in health regen, you can recover a ton of health per turn. So you might remember when we were talking about the Panther and we mentioned the Jugular Strike ability. ability. Well, the Saber-Tooth Tiger has that as well, and it's the same effect. If the target's prone, it deals additional damage. But uniquely, Saber-Tooth Tiger also gets the Shred Armor ability. This one allows you to rip and tear the target, dealing piercing damage and also reducing their armor class by 2 for 2 turns, or until they receive any form of healing. Anything you can do to set up additional damage for your other characters will always be powerful, and reducing an enemy's AC by 2 is absolutely nothing to sneeze at. And you know what they say, there's no kill like overkill. At 10th level, for their final bonus, Moon Druids will gain access to 4 very powerful elemental wild shape forms: the air, earth, fire, and water Myrmidons. It is important to mention up front, all 4 of these forms cost 2 wild shape charges each, so 1 Myrmidon per short rest or long rest. Each of these Myrmidons has similarities, but they are each specialized for different situations as well. So let's take a look at them and figure out which one is good for what job. The Air Myrmidon is a lightning-focused elemental that comes equipped with a Flail of the Vortex, which deals bludgeoning and lightning damage on hit. The Electrified Flail ability is an empowered flail strike, which deals a bit of additional lightning damage and has a chance to stun your target, which is very strong. This is another great option for setting up burst damage because the crowd control enemy is going to be easier for your allies to hit and deal damage to. The Elemental Warp ability is one that each of the Myrmidons will get, and this is half of the reason why each of them has ridiculously good mobility. The other half of that equation is the Fly ability, which will obviously allow you to fly, but the insane thing is how far you are allowed to fly per turn with each one of these things. If you use Fly and Elemental Warp to the maximum of their capabilities, you can pretty much clear the entire battlefield in a single turn. The Air Myrmidon can also turn invisible, which will allow you to sneak around undetected, and lastly, it can cast the Raging Vortex ability. This is a swirling circle of intense wind, which will damage and silence all creatures that are caught inside. This ability can easily be one of the most powerful on the list, depending on who your enemies are and how they're positioned. Just remember that the Air Myrmidon can shut down a group of casters single-handedly. This might save your friggin' life. You can absolutely shut down a room full of casters if they're positioned properly. If you have anybody that has tadpole powers and you have the black hole ability that you can pull people into stuff, you pull those dudes into this freaking silence. Oh my god, things can get gross quick. Moving right along, we've got the Earth Myrmidon next. This form is the only one of the 4 without the ability to fly. Because you're the Earth Myrmidon, you're bound to the Earth. So instead of fly, the Earth Myrmidon gets access to the Burrow ability, and just like the Badger from before, this will allow you to target an area, you burrow underground, travel very, very quickly to where you're going, and then you bust up out of the ground underneath your enemy's feet. So this has just objectively worse mobility than the 3 that can fly, but Burrow is also connected to a built-in attack, so it can potentially deal damage on top of mobility, so that's nice. Your basic attack, Grounded Thunderstrike, deals both bludgeoning and thunder damage and has a chance to knock your target prone. Sludgy Sling will cause a circular blast. That's gonna blast a whole circular. Anyway, Sludgy Sling will cause a circular blast of thick mud in a 10-foot radius around your druid. Any creatures hit by the blast will take a bit of bludgeoning damage, and the area will also become difficult terrain. So, anyone inside of the terrain's movement speed is cut in half, including your druids, unfortunately, which I think is stupid because that's an Earth Myrmidon. They should be immune to that, but you're not. It reduces your movement speed by half. Muck to Metal. This is actually a really cool, unique ability, and I love Larian for the way that they animated this because it looks absolutely awesome. Your Earth Myrmidon turns into a Metal Myrmidon. It looks freaking badass. Look at this thing, ladies and gents. This allows you to trade your mobility for further defense. Your AC is going to increase by 2 while this is active, which is good, but your movement speed will be reduced by 20 feet per turn, which is not great. If you use this ability, you really need to make sure that you're positioned properly, or that your proper position is within an elemental warp of where you're at now, which is great. You can still elemental warp while you're using this, so you can teleport a good distance away. Just know that you're losing a ton of mobility by doing this. Next up on the list, a fan favorite, the Fire Myrmidon. This one is all about speed and damage. You're going to get the Scorching Strike ability, which will deal additional fire damage and has a chance to burn your target. The Cinderous Swipe is a frontal cleave, which will deal additional fire damage to all creatures unlucky enough to get caught in the cone. You also have Hellish Rebuke built into this form, so if you get struck in combat, you can, as a reaction, blast your attacker back with a fire damage spell. This is really nice because it allows you to get some retaliation damage on somebody that hits you, even if they're across the room when they do it, so that's very good. And lastly, but certainly not leastly, the Myrmidon's Immolation ability is a self-cast only version of haste. As long as you can maintain concentration while you have this active, it essentially doubles the effectiveness of your Fire Myrmidon for those 3 turns. But beware of the lethargic debuff you get when those 3 turns run out, or if your concentration is broken by any means at all. Getting hit with lethargy at the wrong time can cause combat to go south very quickly. Just ask this guy. This was devastating to watch, by the way. I just wanted to give him a hug, and I bet he needed it. And as for the 4th and final elemental form, the Moon Druid's final subclass bonus, the Water Myrmidon. This one comes equipped with a trident that deals piercing and cold damage. Primal Strike deals even more additional cold damage and has a chance to chill the target. Chilled targets take half damage from fire, but double damage from cold. So this ability synergizes well with most of the Water Myrmidon's other abilities, including itself. Also, interestingly, if you have a target chilled, and then they get wet, they'll freeze solid. It has to happen in that order. If they're wet and get chilled, nothing happens. If they're chilled and then they get wet, it instantly flash freezes them. Explosive Icicle will allow you to sling 3 ice tridents at individual targets, which will explode, dealing a good amount of cold damage to any creatures in the area, as well as forming slippery ice surfaces under each one of the explosion areas. And now for what I personally think is the Water Myrmidon's most interesting piece of kit, the Healing Vapors ability. You're probably sitting there thinking, how in the hell is the healing ability the most interesting ability that this freaking wild shape form has? Well, the thing is, Healing Vapors does a few things besides just being a healing ability. Firstly, it's important to know that the heal will heal all creatures in its area, including your enemies. It will also give every creature in the area the wet condition. So basically, you're splashing everybody in the area with healing water. So you can probably see where this is a good setup to use with the other ability we described earlier, Primal Strike. You get up to 3 attacks per turn while you're in Water Myrmidon form. So if you can give your Water Myrmidon haste, you drink a potion of speed or give them haste in some other way, you can attack 3 people in a single turn and potentially chill all 3 of them, and then use Healing Vapors and boom, freeze all 3 of them solid. It's possible. It's not going to work every time, not exactly worth it every time either, but it is possible, so keep this in mind. One more thing that makes this Healing Vapors ability even more interesting is that as a Water Myrmidon, your entire body is made out of water. You're an elemental from the plane of water, basically. If the water that your body is made out of gets poisoned, and by that I mean if your druid gets poisoned while you're in Water Myrmidon form, then the Healing Vapors ability, instead of healing all creatures in its area, will deal the same amount of damage in poison form as it would have healed. And it still gets the targets wet. So instead of running in and healing your whole group of enemies by blasting them in that situation, you can run up and chill a bunch of dudes and poison the hell out of everybody in that area while you're freezing them solid. It's crazy how well this works together if you can set it up. They basically turn into a giant walking poison nova, and I love it. So that right there covers all the subclass specific bonuses and abilities that you earn as a Circle of the Moon Druid. Also keep in mind, if you're planning on going Moon Druid, that the Tavern Brawler feat and a few of the game's elixirs work really well with improving wild shape damage, so definitely look into some of those things. Tavern Brawler especially is really good. Larian apparently buffed the wild shape's viability in Baldur's Gate 3. I'm not sure, but I've read that they buffed them by quite a bit, and I'm glad they did, because being able to turn into a friggin' owlbear or a damn spitty dinosaur is badass, and I would be sad if it wasn't worth doing that. With that being said, let's go ahead and head back to second level, and we're going to cover the final subclass, the Circle of the Spores. Viewing death, necrosis, fungal growth, and sporulation as just another part of life, you can manipulate such spores to augment yourself and harm your foes. So that description tells a story about death being a part of life and all that. And you know who likes to talk like that? A freaking necromancer likes to talk like that. But these druids are not just any necromancers. Oh no, ladies and gents. No sir. These guys were ripped straight out of The Last of Us with these freaking creepy ass mushroom zombies that they can raise. So if the decay and rot portion of life is something that you hold dear, the Spore Druid might just be your best bet. Immediately upon choosing the subclass, you're going to be granted the Bone Chill cantrip, which is a cantrip that a lot of people overlook. But I'm here today to tell you that this is a fantastic tool to have in your arsenal, and it absolutely saved my honor mode run on a certain boss fight because of what it does. First of all, it deals a little bit of necrotic damage when you cast it on somebody, but more importantly, it will prevent the target from regaining hit points by any means until your next turn. This was invaluable in my fight against the final boss in Act 2 on honor mode. He was able to summon minions that he could then consume to get back a bunch of health and give him a buff. So I slapped his bones full of the old chill, and he was still consuming his minions and he was still getting a buff from it, but it wasn't healing him anymore. And because of that fact, I was able to outpace his healing with my damage, and I just barely squeezed through that friggin' fight. Also, if the target of Bone Chill is undead, they will have disadvantage on attack rolls while they have the debuff as well. Halo of Spores is a reaction ability that will cause 1d4 necrotic damage to your target, with this amount increasing at levels 6 and 10. It doesn't actually trigger like a reaction, instead requiring you to cast it like a normal spell from your action bar, but it only costs your reaction to use, so this is really cool. And if you don't need your reaction for anything else that turn, you can use it to squeeze out a little bit of extra damage. Building on this idea even further is the Symbiotic Entity ability. This one will grant your druid a good chunk of temporary hit points when you cast it, and as long as you have those temporary hit points, it will bestow a few other cool effects on you. Firstly, while this effect lasts, your Halo of Spores ability that we just discussed, yeah, you can just go ahead and double the damage. While you have these hit points, Halo of Spores does double damage. On top of that, your melee weapon strikes and unarmed attack strikes will deal additional necrotic damage while the shield holds. Using Symbiotic Entity will cost you a wild shape charge, so just know that if you're deciding to go the Circle of Spores route, you're pretty much giving up wild shaping a little bit. You have to make a trade-off, either Symbiotic Entity or wild shape. You don't count as though you are wild shaped for the purposes of having 3 attacks per action. As a Spore Druid, you don't get that, unless you wild shape. If you actually go into a wild shape form, you do, but not because of Symbiotic Entity. That would be super badass, but it would be ridiculously OP, and like everybody would be a Spore Druid monk hybrid or something like that. It'd be ridiculous. Similarly to Circle of the Land, Spore Druids get a ton of additional spells as you're leveling up, but unlike Circle of the Land, you won't have to dig through a massive pile of choices to decide what you want. You're just going to be given 2 spells. At 3rd level, you're going to get Blindness and Detect Thoughts. Both of these are very powerful. Blindness for effectively removing somebody from the fight, and Detect Thoughts for avoiding combat altogether, which is definitely safer. At 5th level, you're going to get 2 more more spells. Animate Dead, which will allow you to summon an undead minion from a suitable corpse that wasn't destroyed in combat. This obviously further leans into the necromancer side of the Spore Druid, and it's a very welcome spell to have, just making your undead horde a little bit bigger. The second spell is Gaseous Form, which will allow you to transform yourself or an ally into a cloud of mist. This will allow them to squeeze into tiny cracks and holes that normal-sized characters couldn't get through, as well as drastically increasing their defenses while pretty much completely doing away with all offensive capability you have until you leave this mist form. This one is great to have because of its travel abilities and potential to squeeze through tiny holes and stuff, but you've had cat form for a long time now, and you can use that for most of the same stuff. So not amazing, but it's not bad by any means, and plus it's badass as hell to turn into a cloud of mist like a vampire and just casually excuse yourself from danger while you're in combat. It's ridiculous. As I mentioned earlier, at 6th level, you will get Halo of Spores upgraded, but much more importantly, you'll get the Fungal Infestation ability and 4 Fungal Infestation charges per long rest. These charges will each allow you to raise one Last of Us Cordyceps zombie, so your horde grows even stronger. And zombies have a knack for infecting targets with the zombie virus, so if they die while they have this infection on them, it'll raise as another weaker zombie that will also aid you, so things can quickly get out of hand when you're running a summoning build with zombies in it. One of my viewers mentioned a build that they had messed around with where they ended up with like 18 or 19 summons following them around at once. I dug through my comments, and I'm sure that I'm just overlooking it, but I could not find this comment to save my life because I'm bad at my job. But just know that there are some insane summoning builds out there that you can make that will absolutely wreak havoc on your enemy's action economy, barely even letting them have a turn because you have so many summons out. Also, thank you very much to whoever had suggested that, and I apologize for losing your comment because I'm an imbecile, so next time, sorry. At 7th level, your Spore Druid will receive the Blight and Confusion spells. Blight is a necrotic damage spell that will always deal maximum damage to plant type enemies. The issue with that is that while there are tons of plant type enemies in this game, most of them are resistant to necrotic damage because of where they are. So the damage gets cut in half anyway. This is not worthless by any means, but I think personally that Confusion is a way better spell than this. This one is an AoE crowd control ability, which will cause all affected creatures to become confused. This will lead them to attack targets at random during their turn, wander around randomly, or even potentially just skip their entire turn altogether. This thing is ridiculously strong and can definitely save your life if used in the right situation. If you're in a fight that's going south and you can get your enemies to just skip their whole turn, or even better, attack each other for a few seconds, that can change the tide of a fight in no time. At 9th level, you will get the Cloud Kill and Contagion spells. Cloud Kill is a targeted AoE damage and area denial spell that does a few things. It deals poison damage to any creatures that are inside it each turn. It heavily obscures everything that's inside it. And this spell can actually be recast each turn as a cantrip as long as you maintain concentration on it. So if the targets move out of Cloud Kill, you can just move it to where they went next turn, hit them with it again. It's really nice. Contagion, on the other hand, is a terrible spell because it requires you to get into melee range to use it, and it requires the target to fail 3 saving throws before it goes into effect fully. This is the train of thought that I had when I first saw this spell, and I don't blame anybody for feeling this way when you first read what Contagion says, but please listen to me while I explain what Contagion does. Because this is easily the spell that I personally underrated the hardest, and this might be one of the best spells in the game after you hear what I have to say about it. Firstly, yes, it does require you to basically walk up and touch the person to cast this disease on them. So in most combat situations, that's automatically worse than a lot of other options you have, and that's why I thought, man, this spell sucks. The massive, ridiculously OP strength of the spell comes in when you find out that casting it on somebody doesn't count as a hostile action. So this spell is not good to use when you're already in combat. This spell is amazing to use when you think you're about to be in combat and you want to set yourself up with a really good situation before fight starts. You can walk up to a target, pick one of these freaking poisons to hit them with and hit them with it, and then just walk away casually. So lore wise, what this would essentially look like is you walk up to someone and you brush up against them, just ever so slightly brush up against them, and then all of a sudden, boom, that person is sick. They're poisoned. Gives them disadvantage on attack rolls and saving throws, and this is where the timer starts. After you inflict this poison on the target, if they are able to succeed 3 Constitution saving throws before they fail 3, then they'll be cured. However, if they fail 3 before they succeed 3, they get struck with a permanent disease that you chose when you cast the spell. So the poison that you hit them with turns into this permanent disease. So that already sounds crazy. You did all this without even entering combat. That person doesn't even know you did this to them, and they're not hostile with you. However, they are struck with a very powerful, permanent debuff. The debuffs can be removed if they have a way to cleanse disease, but if they don't, they're stuck with it. 2 notable options out of the 6 are Flesh Rot and Mind Fire. Flesh Rot will give the target disadvantage on charisma checks and make them vulnerable to all forms of damage. What? Permanently, unless they have a way to cleanse the disease like we discussed before. You walk up, you touch this person that you know you're about to be in combat with. Hey bro, what's up? Ha ha ha, hey, oh, is that a new jacket? Oh yeah, man, what is that made out of? Suede? Fleece? What is that? All of a sudden they have an incurable super disease that they can't get rid of, and they don't even know where it came from. Mind Fire will give the target disadvantage on intelligence checks, and they will be permanently inflicted with confusion. Mind Fire is the one of the 6 that will actually make the target hostile when the poison turns into the disease Mind Fire. However, if you kill somebody that was affected this way and became hostile, it doesn't even count as a crime. I tested this and it worked a few times. What I will say is be careful doing this in honor mode, just in case this is a bug and it gets patched or something. I don't want to be the guy that was like, oh yeah, you can just mind fire everybody and then kill everybody in Baldur's Gate and it's not a crime. And then all of a sudden Withers is coming after you because you killed everybody in the city. You don't want that dude on your bad side. The description of these diseases is horrifying too. Affected entity's brain is cooking in a stew of hot blood, and you're passing these things out like Mardi Gras beads. Also, even more ridiculously, I tested this so that you don't have to. You can absolutely get these diseases on somebody and then go take a long rest and come back and put more diseases on them. I had all 6 diseases on this dwarf. This guy was the most diseased individual in all of Faerun. He had every freaking disadvantage on every check, vulnerability to every damage. Anytime he got hit, he was stunned until his next turn. It was horrible for this dude. There was nothing he could do in a fight. He's got blood and oil spewing out of his pores. His eyes were stabbed out by spikes of pain. His body is rotting away inside its own skin, and his brain is boiling in its own blood. You know, just a walk in the freaking park this guy has. Now that we've covered these ridiculous scenarios, imagine a situation where you have multiple companions that have access to these contagion abilities, and you send them into the room before you bring your main party in there just to start touching people left and right, spreading diseases around. Then your party walks in and everybody's hacking up a freaking lung and you just chop them all down, no problem. And for your final subclass bonus, we're back at 10th level, where your Halo of Spores reaction ability is going to get upgraded for the final time to a total of 1d8 necrotic damage, which is doubled while you have symbiotic entity, as we said before. So 2d8 is not bad at this level. Once again, for a reaction, it's not terrible, and over the course of your playthrough, you are definitely going to be causing hundreds of damage with Halo of Spores, so it's definitely a great ability to have. Almost for free, so yeah. Spreading Spores is a new ability you get at 10th level also. It requires you to have Symbiotic Entity active, and it will allow you to target an area, causing a cloud of spores to burst forth in that area. These will choke your enemies and cause their throats to swell shut. from how dry the spores are, to the tune of 2d8 necrotic damage. So it's basically like AoE Halo of Spores, unless the creatures pass a Constitution saving throw. And note that spreading spores specifically says in its tooltip that it does not affect you or your allies. And also note that NPCs that have a yellow outline around them are not your allies when it comes to the purposes of targeting spells like this. They count as neutral, not allied. Just ask Preach. He'll tell you.
Oh.
And I get it. I understand the thought process. Just know, if an enemy's yellow, they're not your friend. They're just not your enemy. I said if an enemy's yellow. If an NPC is yellow, if an enemy's yellow, then they're this guy from Sin City. Also note that the spores from spreading spores will immediately disappear if you lose the temporary hit points from symbiotic entity. It's still an amazing ability to have though, especially since it only costs a bonus action to use. So on your turns, you can do a heavy hitting spell for a regular action, spreading spores for a bonus action, and then Halo of Spores for a reaction to deal damage in 3 separate ways in a single turn. And that's on top of the fact that you can have a ton of minions running around dealing damage every turn also. There's a lot of things that this druid can do. It's not necessarily the flashiest or the most fun subclass to play in the game, but Spores Druids are not bad at all, and you can do a ton of stuff with it. One thing to note, if you don't limit yourself to undead summons and you summon everything that your druid has available, you can get Mephits, you can get a Dryad, Wood Woads, Elemental, obviously your zombies and skeletons and stuff from Animate Dead, ghouls from Animate Dead, your 4 fungus zombies, Dance Macabre for good measure, so you can summon a ton more zombies. You can have a freaking ridiculous amount of summons, and let me be the first to tell you, if you haven't heard anybody say this, when you have that many summons on the field and you enter combat, it can take a long time to get through a fight. So just know that. Some of your fights are going to take forever because you have like 15-20 turns to go through per round. It can really be slow, but the odds are stacked firmly in your favor when it comes to action economy because you have every minion in the world standing in between you and your enemies. They're not just there for damage. You can put them in between you and archers to have them eat the arrows instead of you. You can have them eat opportunity attacks by moving in close to enemies and then moving away. The person swings at them. That wastes their reaction, and now if your other character moves away, they don't have an opportunity attack to use against you. So you can bait out attacks like that. You can use them to reposition enemies or even just distract them. You put a zombie right up in your enemy's face, there's a good chance that the enemy's going to sit there and swing at that zombie at least one time. Even if it kills the zombie in one hit, that's one hit that your caster didn't just take to the face. It's ridiculously powerful. And zombies, like we said before, where they spread their zombie disease, they have a knack for making even more minions for you to use in the fight. So things can seriously snowball. And ladies and gents, that's it. This sums up the entire Circle of the Spores Druid. There is life and there is death. And then there's you firmly in the balance. You leave a trail of rot and decay in your wake in your pursuit of defending the sanctity of life. And you also have an army of minions following you around doing your bidding. Like I said before, definitely not the most fun playstyle in the game, but Spore Druids are not bad by any means. So now that we know what the Druid in Baldur's Gate 3 has to offer, I want to talk to you guys about a couple of non-D&D related characters that I think might be Druids. And we're definitely going to be diving back into comic book characters again because I love them. First up, I want to talk about the Guardian of the Green, Alec Holland, Swamp Thing. I'm using the DC Universe fandom page for this info, by the way, so check them out also. I want you guys to see this freaking powers and abilities list. First off, his body is made entirely of sentient plant matter. He survives through photosynthesis and composting because he's a plant. His strength level is incalculable when he's tapped into the green, which is essentially DC Universe's version of the source of all nature magic. He can talk to and control all forms of plant life. up to and including rapidly growing the microscopic flora inside a person's body, causing it to burst out from their body, killing them instantly from the inside out. He can also astral project his essence into any plant anywhere in the world, forming a new body out of the plant matter in that area. So he can teleport anywhere there's plant life almost instantly. He friggin' grew a giant model of an actual brain out of plant matter with working neurons and everything, connected it to his own brain, and it massively increased his intelligence while he was connected to it. So it rooted him in place, but he was ridiculously smart while he was connected to this super brain. So honestly, travelers, I don't think we can safely sit here and call the Swamp Thing a druid. Honestly, I don't know what he would be classified as. If someone forced me to make a decision, I would probably put him closer to being an archfey than a druid. I think he is so powerful in nature magic. He's almost like he's like the embodiment of nature. He's like Mother Nature's wrath, basically. So I would put him at archfey. If you guys know a better way to classify him, let me know down in the comments. I would love to hear even more lore stuff that I don't know about. But either way, he's a freaking absolute unit of a character. He's very nature related, definitely fits in with the theme of druids anyway. Every time this guy gets called into a fight to help, he friggin' wrecks somebody. It's awesome. And here to showcase a few similar powers, we have Dr. Pamela Isley, Poison Ivy. Ivy gained her powers through an experiment gone wrong, which turned her into like a half human, half plant hybrid kind of thing. So she might not even really fit with the druid classification either, but too bad. She's definitely closer than Swamp Thing. He's just too much of a force in nature itself. Don't mistake that for me calling Ivy weak though, because she's definitely not. You don't get to be a Batman main villain by being weak. Like the Swamp Thing, she can control plants that are in her vicinity. She can cause them to grow and attack her foes, entangle them, ensnare them, you know, whatever. She can control it like it's part of her body. Her body generates various different poisons, and she herself is completely immune to almost all toxins, bacteria, and viruses. She can produce pheromones that basically mind control people into doing her bidding by making them so attracted to her. And even when she doesn't have access to her pheromones, obviously she's still attractive, so that works in her favor too. She can regenerate lost limbs like a plant regrows its branches or stem or whatever. So she's very, very powerful. She's essentially like a spore druid in a lot of ways, but also maybe like a nature-based warlock kind of character. She gets her powers from the green also. Anyway, if there's a better way you guys think to categorize Poison Ivy, let me know once again. I just wanted to nerd out about some damn druid-like characters that I knew of. And that's it. That's the whole thing, ladies and gents. Thank you for watching the video. If you did, if you enjoyed yourself, be sure to like the video. That really helps me out for sure. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this or various other RPG content. I'm going to be covering other games coming up soon as well. Come to the Discord if you want to hang out, nerd out about video games and comic books or anything like that. We're a bunch of like-minded nerds talking about RPG stuff or comic books, whatever you got. If you want to support the channel further, there's a link to my Patreon in the video description. And I think there's some way to do it through YouTube, but I don't know. I'm going to have to look into this more, because I'm bad at this. Anyway, I do appreciate all the support you guys have given me, but as always, I am glad you got to see me. Do your best to stay alive. Until next time, see ya.
And keep still, devil. Tila is restless.